Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. We have a full house today, so we're gonna have to yell. I want to welcome you to the second Saturday seminar. Try to say that fast, of our 2026 series. Happy New Year. I'm Pam Dyer of the La Plata County Historical Society's Board of Directors, here with Robert McDaniel, who will be presenting Railhead Animas City, to be or not to be. But first, some quick guidance for those on Zoom so we can get started. We are using Zoom's webinar feature, which means that you all are muted and your videos are on off. At the bottom of your screen, and you may need to use your mouse to scroll down to see them, there are some icons. We have disabled the chat function today, so please use the Q&A. If you have an immediate issue or question, please click the Q&A icon, as we will be monitoring that. Also, we are supporting closed caption, but you do need to turn it on if you want it. To do so, just navigate down to the icons at the bottom of your screen, click on the captions and enable show captions. It will be green if it's enabled. Let's hold all your questions until the end of the talk, but on Zoom, go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A at any time, and we will get to them at the end. This session is being recorded, and you will receive an email in 24 hours with a link to the recording and any show notes. We also have someone from PBS here today, and she would like to take some pictures, but if you do not want to be in a photograph, please let us know with your show of hands. Sweet. Okay, any questions? Since you're not on Zoom, you shouldn't have any. Okay. We also want to let you know that the museum is open to the public Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday from 10 to 4, and Wednesday and Friday from 1 to 4. So be sure to bring your friends and family. Our newest exhibit, Animas City Looking Down on Durango Since 1876, is open in the main gallery upstairs. Also in January, we'll be opening a traveling exhibit on the Old Spanish Trail, thanks to the Old Spanish Trail Association and Al Harper from the Durango and Silverton Railroad. Watch our social media and website for more information on the opening of this exhibit. Next month, as we promised, we've got Charles G. Ferdinando and Ed Horvat back for part 2 of their series, Yesterday and Today, a walk up Main Avenue. It was really good, you guys. This will be on February 14th at 1 p.m. Again, both here at the museum and on Zoom. You can register for a Zoom link on our website. Just a little bit more. If you aren't already a member, please join us by signing up on our website. You get access to our online catalog database, and feel free to visit our website for even more resources. Subscribe to our e-blast, follow us on Facebook, and like us on Instagram. If you would like to see more programming like this, like the one you're about to see, please donate either on the website or here at the museum in the donation jars. Now let's get started. In 2026, we are commemorating 3 anniversaries: the 250th of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the 150th of Colorado statehood, and the 150th of the founding of Animas City. And that is the first anniversary we are looking at today with Robert's talk about early Animas City and Durango. If you don't know Robert, he is a 4th generation Durangoan. I was going to say Durangatang.
Animas City guy.
Animas City? Ah. And the following director and founding director of the Animas Museum. Many of us associate him with skiing. He had a 38-year career as a professional ski patrolman at Purgatory Resort, and his talk, Longboards and Rope Tows, on the history of skiing in Lapata County was one of our first webinars and can be found on our YouTube channel at Animas Museum. We are happy to have him here today to kick off this year's seminar series. Robert McDaniel.
You did such a nice job, Pam. Maybe I should just let you give this program. Well, it is the 150th anniversary of a lot of things, but the founding of Animas City. I give you that date because that's the date that 6 investors, real estate investors, purchased a 640-acre, I'm going to call it a ranch. Some people called it a homestead. You could not homestead 640 acres, at least not here. In fact, 640 acres is 4 homesteads. You know, you could take out 160 acres. Anyway, where's my sheet here? I've got the names, if I can read it in the dark. They were J.D. Annan, Kenny, Canfield, Marsh, Rule, Newt, Hamel, Schwenk, Ira Smith, and W.E. Earl. Probably never heard of any of them. Some of them have streets named after them, though. I think they're still in Earl Street. Anyway, you know, this area was not open for white settlement till 1874 because of a treaty with the Ute Indians, the Brunel Agreement, actually. And that was not finalized till April of 1874. Pretty quickly, people moved into the valley, mostly to establish farms and ranches to feed the miners up around the Silverton area. And in fact, Robert Dwyer, who we will talk more about, established really he was the first settler in the area of what's now Durango. Animas City soon followed. It didn't grow quickly. It was not per se a mining town. It was not at this point a railroad town. And really, as we shall see, never really was. By 1880, they had filed a plat and articles of incorporation with the land office, which was in Lake City at that time, in September of 1876. By 1880, Animas City had a post office, a bank, a school, a hardware store, general and drug stores, a livery, a newspaper, a church, 7 lawyers, 3 doctors, a dentist, a couple of blacksmiths, and a population of 286 people. So, small town, but a thriving little town, had more of a rural Midwestern flavor than, say, somebody like Silverton or Durango would become a railroad boomtown. Where am I here? I need a light over here. Dark. Into the valley in a couple of years comes the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. It was the brainchild of William Jackson Palmer, who had been he raised his own unit of Union cavalry, Pennsylvania 15th, during the Civil War, received what now would be the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. But he had been involved a little bit in railroading before the war, got involved again after the war with the Kansas Pacific Railroad, which was building west across the plains into Colorado. He cooked up this idea for a new railroad that would essentially be a north-south railroad that would tie together many of the transcontinental lines that were being built across the country at that time. So they incorporated in 1870 in Denver. Here's a map dated 1870 that sort of spoke to their vision, or his vision anyway. You can see Denver up here. Denver's up here. This is mostly, as you can see, a north-south trending line. They plan to build all the way into Mexico. They obviously anticipated building to Salt Lake City as well, which is not north-south, and things would change. But interestingly, an extension into the San Juan mining region was anticipated even as early as 1870. The railroad, DNRG got into a problem with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad over a couple of key routes. One to Leadville, up the Royal Gorge, up the Arkansas River. Leadville was a booming mining area by that time. The other key route was over Raton Pass, which was the best route to get to the Rio Grande and building south and tapping, the New Mexico trade as well. They got into it. It was a battle. Both of them had their armed camps, although it was a noisy but bloodless war and mostly fought out in the court system. And the net result of that was that the Santa Fe got rights to the route over Raton Pass. The Rio Grande got rights to the route up the Royal Gorge to Leadville. But most importantly, I think for the Denver and Rio Grande, it forced a change in philosophy. It would no longer be primarily a north-south railroad, but there were a number of areas in Colorado that were developing as mining regions, and so they ended up building branch lines mostly to places like Silverton, Lake City, Crested Butte, Ouray, and so on. That was all settled by about 1880. Silverton becomes a primary goal because actually the Baker Party had come into Baker's Park, which is where Silverton's located, in the summer of 1860. They wintered over at a little log town that they built up by Baker's Bridge that they called Animas City. So there have been two Animas cities in our past, and it's been a source of confusion, ever since, really. There's nothing left of the original Animas City other than some depressions and maybe a few stones that may have served as fireplaces or maybe rock foundations or something. The Baker Party left in the spring of 1861, and the Civil War got started. So really nothing else happened until after the Civil War, but prospectors began coming back in 1869, 1870, and a couple of them kind of struck it rich. They found some good diggings. The Little Giant Mine was founded, and in those early 1870s years, though, and this is still a Ute reservation, okay? So they're trespassing. The miners at that time did not stay over the winter. You know, they weren't living there year round. Not until 1874, when some of the first cabins were built. So Silverton, obviously a very isolated place. The mining area is booming though. This is a photo of Silverton before the railroad arrives in 1882. And just to orient you, you know, this is taken from, kind of up by the hillside cemetery, looking basically south. Cement Creek is right here. That's the one that carried all that poison metallic yellow water from the Gold King mine spill a few years ago. Looking small, but fairly prosperous little town considering how isolated they were. You know, the main route into Silverton at that time was over Stony Pass, which if you go up there in the summer, you no doubt scratch your head about how they got wagons and everything else and over that pass and into Silverton. One thing I wanted to point out, can you see my cursor? Okay. Right here is what was the Green Smelter. Greene was named after a man named Green. Later on, they would move the workings of that smelter down to Durango, and it would become part of the New York and San Juan smelter, San Juan and New York. I've seen it both ways. So one thing that Silverton needed to boom, for that mining area to prosper, was a rail connection. So let's puzzle this out a little bit. By 1880, this is while the so-called Royal Gorge War was taking place. The Rio Grande had built into Alamosa over La Veta Pass. Raton Pass is over here. The route up to Leadville, up the Royal Gorge, Arkansas River, is up here. So Alamosa's here, Silverton's over here. You think, well, you know, logic would tell you they kind of go in a straight line there. And in fact, it was about 110 miles from Alamosa to Silverton, probably more as the crow flies, and any railroad that would have gone over Cunningham Pass, which was near Stony Pass, would have had a lot of twists and turns. And so Palmer's chief engineer and all his crews apparently had like 500 workers just on his engineering survey crews. They were surveying different potential routes to get to Silverton, over up the Rio Grande and over Cunningham Pass was one route, or one option. Up the South Fork of the Rio Grande was another option, which is kind of where Wolf Creek Pass goes now. Another route up Alamosa Creek that didn't curry much favor. As it turned out, and of course now I'm gonna go a slide here. John Aiden McMurtry was the chief engineer and Robert Whitebreck, the construction superintendent. McMurtry is mostly part of the story here though. And these guys were applying the logics of geography, engineering, topography, the lay of the land, whereas the real decision makers, Palmer and men who were in his inner circle, were thinking differently. And the decision was made, back up here, late in the summer of 1879 to build a route, not the short route, but a very circuitous route that took him clear down into New Mexico. And it begs the question, why? Why would they do that? You know, it would cost them a lot more money to build that way. And it totally, when McMurtry found out where they had to marshal their forces to engineer and build this rail line, San Juan Extension, he was flabbergasted. And in fact, Alexander, I haven't got to Hunt yet, but let me, I'll skip around a little bit. But Alexander Hunt was the next territorial governor of Colorado. William Bell is key to this story, and we'll talk about him in a minute. But Hunt and McMurtry were at odds with each other. They didn't like each other, and Hunt was in a position to undercut him. And McMurtry was not a happy camper about they hadn't even done really any surveying work for this route they were supposed to take. Was it an easy route? Not even. From Antonito to Chama, I think you can see that on here. Here's Antonito, here's Chama. You know, on a map of this scale, it makes it look simple, but it's a distance of 35 miles. They built 64 miles of track to cover that distance. The rail line crossed the Colorado-New Mexico boundary 12 times. They had to build the first 2 tunnels that the DNRG ever built. And I think they were 2 of the most difficult tunnels that the DNRG ever built in its entire existence. And I think there were a total of 14. Now, I'm not sure if that counts the Moffett tunnel because it was actually not built by the DNRG, but it was later owned by the DNRG. But Toltec tunnel was horrendously expensive for them to build, and the mud tunnel. These 2 tunnels were pretty close to each other. The mud tunnel was drilled in very unstable ground, so they called it the mud tunnel. This was the rock tunnel or Toltec tunnel. But when you came out this west portal that you see in this illustration, it was over 600 feet straight down to the river down there. It was Los Pinos River, not our Los Pinos River, but a different one. So this was construction of the most difficult kind. It was difficult to survey, it was difficult to build, it was extremely expensive to build. So why did they do this? Well, some theories put forth are that the Conejos and Parkview toll road provided the railroad relatively easy access for marshaling supplies for that construction. They were also always concerned about the Santa Fe and other railroads might beat them to the punch in certain areas, and they wanted to forestall the Santa Fe from building into Colorado from the south. And there were also, on the route they chose, there were coal deposits. Coal becomes a big part of the picture. Everything ran on coal. The trains ran on coal, the smelters ran on coal. People heated with coal, businesses heated with coal. Coal was a big commodity to take advantage of. But there's another thing, and that is land speculation or real estate opportunities. And this southern route presented opportunities like that building over Cunningham Pass did not. So William Bell, both of these guys really worked on that aspect of it, although Bell more than Hunt. Bell was an Englishman who was a medical doctor who had come to America, gotten interested, as so many people did, in Western expansion railroading and got involved with the building of the Kansas Pacific Railroad, just as Palmer did. And that's where he met Palmer. And they teamed up, became fast friends, close associates, and Bell was involved with the development, mostly the real estate development aspect of the DNRG. Now you say, why was there so much real estate development? Remember that this construction of all these narrow gauge lines and the Denver Rio Grande from the beginning was built narrow gauge. That's 3 feet between the rails instead of 4 foot 8.5 inches standard gauge. And there were good reasons for that, especially building in the mountains, because you could negotiate sharper curves, steeper grades. Road beds didn't have to be so wide. Equipment was smaller. Lots of advantages for building in mountain terrain. Anyway, Bell helped found Colorado Springs, and actually the railroad had developed a pattern of building up to an existing community and throttling it, developing their own town. They did that to Colorado City. They did it in Pueblo. They did it in Trinidad. They did it in all kinds of places. So how does Animas City fit into this? Well, if the Rio Grande is going to build this southern route and come into the Animas Valley from the south, they're going to have to go right past Animas City. The rumor started to make the rounds in the late 1870s, 1879, that the railroad's coming through. Animas City people are no doubt rubbing their hands together at the thought of becoming the Railhead. And there was a lot of anticipation about that. Well, would the Denver Rio Grande make Animas City the Railhead or not? So no doubt, I mean, I see mostly locals in the room here. You've all heard the story that the railroad came in, negotiated with the town fathers of Animas City to, for land to develop and things like that. And Animas City, long story short, turned them down, which on the face of it would seem to be a pretty stupid thing, especially with hindsight, when we know what happened to Animas City. This always bothered me. It just didn't make any sense. So a number of years ago, I thought, I'm going to do a little research and see what I can find out. So what I want to do is share with you some of the stuff that's been written in published works, key pieces of information that bear on this question. Mary Ayres was the daughter of Robert E. Sloan. Sloan had been with Palmer in the Civil War, was one of his lieutenants, figuratively, I don't know about literally. And Palmer, after the war, managed to twist his arm, and it took some arm twisting, because he had a very comfortable life in Pennsylvania. But Palmer convinced him to help him with Kansas Pacific construction and then Denver and Rio Grande. So Mary Ayres, who was actually born in Denver, didn't move to Durango until 1894, but spent the rest of her life here. But she had access to the people who were on the ground and were part of this whole process. She wrote an article for the Colorado Magazine, which was publication of the Colorado Historical Society at that time. So in part, Mary says, when it was known that a new city was to be built on the Animas at the coming of the railroad, A party of capitalists, of whom Dr. William A. Bell of Colorado Springs was one, endeavored to buy the land south of Animas City, which was held as a homestead. This is Robert Dwyer's homestead. Failing to come to an agreement with the homesteader regarding price, the land constituting the original Durango town site was homesteaded by John W. Guthrie, George Hitchings, James Cook, Eliza Duggan, Solomon Keck, and Benjamin Holmes, and was subsequently turned over to the town company. Okay, no mention of any negotiations with Animas City. This is 1930. Robert Athern was a history professor at the University of Colorado. In fact, we're going to talk about Dwayne Smith here in a minute, and he was one of Dwayne's professors when Dwayne was in graduate school at CU. Athern, wrote the history of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, and it's a great history. Athern says Palmer's company drove on, bound for a new town called Durango, which, according to Palmer, had just sprung up. It sprang up in the manner of a number of other towns along the line, which I was alluding to previously, where they would build up to an existing town and develop their own town. Dr. William A. Bell, that master of municipal organization, had scouted the country in advance of construction in search of a suitable site for further DNRG land speculation. After failing to come to terms with homesteaders holding land adjacent to Animas City, he made arrangements with several individuals to file homestead claims along the river, after which they sold out to the Durango Land and Coal Company. Okay, this is 1962. I have to say about Dwayne, I mean, he was one of my mentors. He was one of the people who changed my life and turned me from a math major to a history major. We owe him a huge debt of gratitude for what his contributions to local history, especially. I mean, he wrote about a lot of things other than local history, but he noticed not long after he came here that there was no published history of Durango, no full history. So he set out to do that. And, he published his full-length Rocky Mountain Boomtown in Durango's centennial year, 1980. But he wrote this little booklet about Durango's first year in 1977. It was called Sagebrush Metropolis. In the winter of 1879-80 came rumors that the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad planned to build through the valley on its way to tap the San Juan mines at Silverton. This generated unprecedented excitement. A railroad connection could convert Animas City into a thriving regional trade center. Truer words never spoken. Then in his Rocky Mountain Boomtown, he said Durango might never have seen the light of day had not the ambitious DNRG Railroad clashed with a stubborn Animas City. The Rio Grande was willing to develop Animas City into a railroad center for a price and on its terms. Animas City would not stoop to either demand. Now, he doesn't come right out and say here that there were meetings. But if you read Rocky Mountain Boomtown, his whole first chapter says it has a lot about Animas City. And to a certain degree, that's great because Animas City deserved its due. But I'm not sure where he got these notions that there were these meetings with the Animas City town fathers and that they just flat turned the railroad down. He kind of, I mean, if you read him carefully, talks around it a little bit, but the statement Animas City would not stoop to either demand is pretty straightforward. Well, we all admired Dwayne for the work that he had done so much, and he became Mr. History here, that became the story. It became the story that there were meetings and that Animas City would not stoop to these demands. But there is no documentation that I've been able to find, or anybody else has been able to find, that backs that up. Rocky Mount Boomtown, I think, is a great history of Durango. It's got its strengths, probably like most books, and its weaknesses. Some of its weaknesses, two of its notable weaknesses are lack of documentation, serious lack of footnotes, and no bibliography at all. There's a bibliographical essay at the back, but no bibliography that states his sources. Now, he does mention in his essay the William Bell papers, and I believe there are at least two sets of William Bell papers, one at, I can't remember if it's at CU or at the Colorado, History Colorado now. Yeah. And the other bunch of William Bell papers is in Colorado Springs. So maybe he saw something there that I haven't seen. Late in the game, this is like a couple of days ago, I thought, I should look at Retha Luzar's book, The Animas City Story. It's a little booklet about the size of Sagebrush Metropolis. It's mostly, she had mostly lived almost all her life in Animas City, went to school in this building that was here before the roof burned. It's mostly a folkish history book, but she did do some research and deliver some hard facts in that book. So I read the whole book again, and she also mentions, she says, in the last month of 1880, which is completely wrong, but in the last month of 1880, there were these meetings between the railroad and the Animas City. And she made an assumption that there was more than one meeting, which is, in my view, a faulty assumption, the thing that she based that on. So this is starting to find its way into this notion, find its way into other books and other things. Like if you walk the Animas River Trail much, there's an interpretive panel about Animas City. And there's a quote on it. And of course, you have to boil it down for these panels. You don't have a lot of words, but it says, if I can find that. I can't find it. But it basically says that Animas City just flat turned down the railroad. They denied them a site for a depot. So raise your hand if you've studied a little history around here, even heard a little bit, if that's been your understanding over the years, that there were these meetings and Animas City turned them down. Okay, a lot of hands. So see, that's kind of become the common accepted story. The things I'm going to show you are pretty much going to create a lot of doubt in your mind about that. And it starts with Alan Nosman, the great Alan Nosman, who set forth to write a very detailed history of Silverton. But he took the broader view, and we serious historians love this guy, loved him. He's been gone quite a few years now, but in his volume 3, he writes an entire chapter about the building of the railroad up to Silverton. And he says there are some undocumented assumptions that railroad negotiators sat down at some point with Animas City officials to discuss a terminus. If the Denver, Rio Grande, and Animas City couldn't come to terms, they were the railroad's terms. And any meetings were more than likely window dressing. One of my favorite Ellen Dosselman pithy comments. The railroad doubtless had its eye from the beginning on the inviting level land and low mesa inside a broad bend in the Rio de las Animas about 2 miles south of Animas City. And the move to establish Durango succeeded to an extent only a few other DNRG townsite ventures had. So here's kind of a visual of how that all happened. This image was taken in 1897 by a USGS photographer from Animas Mountain. So down here you see kind of the southern part of Animas City. Here's the old brick schoolhouse here. 1897 was 7 years before they started construction on this building, which would have been right about here. Down here, obviously, is Durango. Smelters smoking away like crazy. Here's Junction Creek, this line of trees. College Hill over here, Durango's reservoir, Animas River flowing south. You're looking, down the valley of the Animas, and this is the way the railroad came in. This pretty much open area in between the two towns was Robert Dwyer's homestead. 160 acres, all to the west of the river, spanned Junction Creek. He didn't sell out to the railroad, but he did sell out to the Durango Railway and Realty Company that wanted to develop his ranch as a subdivision to Durango called Brookside. And that name's kind of lost to history now. I think, is Brookside Park still the name of the park? So it's still, that name still kind of persists. And of course, the fairgrounds, this is the fairgrounds here, the racetrack, and the old wooden grandstands. These houses here, some of them were Dwyer's in-laws, the Clarks. And Dwyer himself built a beautiful brick home that's on West 2nd, and I think this is it right here. And it's still there today. The museum's got a photo of Robert Dwyer and his wife standing out in front of their beautiful brick home when it was new, and they're these little cottonwood trees that he planted in the yard. They're like this big around, and now they're like this big, and there's at least one of them still there. Did I do that right? Yeah. This is a illustration from one of the illustrated newspapers at that time. The magic city of the Southwest. It just sprang up, as Palmer said, sprang up at the hands of William Bell, mostly. So what happened here? Bell, unable to purchase Dwyer's homestead, actually, and Athearn said homesteaders, plural. I don't know where he got multiple homesteaders. I mean, Dwyer's homestead was the one directly south of Animas City. But Bell somehow found 6 people. There were 7, but he found 6 people that would agree to give him power of attorney, take out these homesteads, sell them to the real estate arm of the railroad, and they would develop the Durango town site. So I looked in the county records. I got all the powers of attorney, all the deeds, all the homestead patents. And here's what you come up with in an aerial view. Now, Hitchings is the outlier here. He was apparently a legitimate homesteader. He lived in Animas City in the 1880 census, and he was a single miner, and he actually lived here. None of these other people, as far as we can tell, ever lived here, probably never set foot in La Plata County. So these homesteads range in size from homestead parcels, I guess I'll call them, 160 acres for hitchings. The others were either 120 acres or 80 acres. Some of the 80-acre parcels, I think, were taken out by people who'd served, men who'd served in the Civil War, and they were entitled to an additional 80-acre homestead over on top of 160-acre homestead somewhere else. But, so here's Hitchings, here's Guthrie, here's Stansbury. This is all superimposed on the Durango town site. Here's Solomon Keck, here's Benjamin Holmes, here's Eliza Duggan, and here's James Cook. And I think you can kind of see in the image, Fort Lewis is up here, the river comes down here, here's Maine. Well, here's that's actually Camino. It's Highway 550, the red line there, but Main Avenue would be here. The smelter was located down here. And so that kind of orients you. So here's kind of how it played out. That top section shows the dates that powers of attorney were executed between 6 of those people and William Bell. The earliest one I could find was July the 13th of 1879. That puts into doubt certainly Retha Luzar's statement, but Duane's timing too. And great a historian as Duane was, he was lousy about using dates to give you context. But the point of this is Bell was out there conniving to get this land for a town site no later than early part of 1879. I mean, they weren't flying into the Durango airport. There were hardly any roads in here. He's having to travel on horseback or something. Just the traveling and communication, all that stuff took weeks and months. So probably by the early part of 1879, they've already got figured out what they're doing. Animas City was none the wiser at that point, I don't think. The homestead patents for 6 of the 6 non-residents were recorded February 12th, 1881. The warranty deeds to Bell were recorded or executed March 23rd, 1881. And if you look down at the bottom, well, there's a note here that there were a number of other powers of attorney. So it wasn't just a Durango town site that this little kind of, I'm going to call it, land shenanigans took place. And I think somewhere I have a note that in Dwayne Smith's Sagebrush Metropolis, he said the railroad acquired 2,500 and some acres. A lot of it was agricultural land or coal, had coal deposits, things like that. So, their scheme to make money was not just real estate development, it had to do with developing coal resources, selling agricultural lands, water rights, and bringing the smelter down from Silverton, which then would generate a lot of rail traffic for the railroad, ensure Durango's economic prosperity, and so on. So down at the bottom, here's a little information about residents. On the POAs, the powers of attorney that were given, the only one that lived in La Plata County was George Hitchings. The others lived in Kansas, Arkansas, Alabama, and Missouri. But if you look in the warranty deeds, it lists all of those people as living in La Plata County. Now, I just don't think that's true. In fact, we found census information to the contrary. I've given this program a couple of times, and the last time I gave it was for the Genealogical Society, so I was kind of traveling right before I had to give that program, so I got a couple of my genealogy buddies to help me do this research, but we're wondering, like, who were these people? What connection did they have to Bell? How did he know about them? Were they related? Were they men or wives of men or widows of men that had served with Palmer in the Civil War? Who were they? So we did some genealogy, and we were not able to really, I mean, we found out information about them, but we could find no connection with those individuals and anybody like Bell or Palmer or Hunt. Not that there might not have been, but we couldn't find anything like that. And there didn't seem to be any real common denominator. We didn't find any information that they were related somehow, lived in the same places. A couple of them did, but so James Cook, born in Alabama, died in Arkansas. His residence in 1880 and 1900, 1890 census burned, Bridge Creek, Washita County, Arkansas. Appeared to live much of his life in and around that county. His POA to Bell identifies him as a single man, though he later married. Bell paid him $200 for his 80-acre parcel. And let me stop and say, when you took out a homestead, most of us think about the option where people could come and live on their homestead for 5 years, improve up on it, meet certain requirements, build a dwelling and till the ground and, make improvements. And in 5 years, if you met the requirements, you could, pay a small fee and get title to that homestead. But you could also just buy it. You could buy the land from the federal government for $1.25 an acre. So for a 160-acre homestead, it costs you $200. A little hard to get your head around that these days, isn't it? Anyway, I assume that the short time period that was involved here with these homesteads, they had to be bought instead of proved up on. Plus, the people didn't live here to do the proving up. This guy was in an Alabama infantry regiment, so much for the idea that they might have served on the Union side, huh? And blah, blah, blah there. Eliza Duggan, she was a widow, born in Tennessee, died in Arkansas. Residence from 1860 up to 1880 was Pike County, Arkansas. Appeared to live most of her life in Pike County, Arkansas. Her homestead, a patent identifies her as the widow of Arnett S. Duggan, and she was paid $200 for her 80 acres. If she bought it, it should have cost her $100, so she doubled her money. What's not to love? She also took out some other homesteads in Arkansas. Interestingly, Guthrie, and his name is spelled two different ways. All I couldn't find photos of any of these people, so I used their headstones. Born in either Alabama or Mississippi, died possibly in Alabama. Couldn't find that out. Residents in 1850 and subsequent censuses, Walker County, Alabama. POA to Bell listed that he was paid $500 for his 120-acre homestead. You know, the amounts paid to these homesteaders was not uniform in a per acre price. That may have had to do with how choice the land was that they were selling, as opposed to like hillsides like College Hill or something. He apparently was in the Union Army. George Hitchings, born in New Brunswick, Canada, died in Visalia, California. Was single his whole life. In the 1880 census, he was in Animas City, listed as a single minor, ER, not OR. Moved to California in 1885, so he sold his homestead to Bell and took the money and ran off to California. No known relatives when he died. He was paid $500 for his 160-acre homestead. We couldn't find anything. We found information about a number of Benjamin homes, but we couldn't figure out which one was our guy. Keck, born in Ohio, died in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Residence in 1880. This is when these homestead transactions are taking place. Chautauqua County, Kansas. Served in the Union Army. And I couldn't find what Keck was paid for his homestead. Stansbury, born in Tennessee, died in Missouri. Residence in 1870 and 1880 was Webster County, Missouri. Served in the Union Army. He was paid $500 for his 120-acre homestead. And on a number of these, the wives in the document released their dower. I won't go into that unless you, I looked that up the last time I did this. Now I can't quite remember exactly how that went, but yeah, I think basically released any claim that she would have against that homestead. So here's some comparisons for what Bell and Hunt paid for the land, and some examples of sales in the Durango town site. Hitchings was paid $500 for 160 acres. I even, give you a per acre price there, $3.13.5 an acre. Doug and Cook and Holmes, they all had 80-acre parcels, paid $200, doubled their money, $250 an acre. Guthrie and Stansbury, $500 for 120 acres each, $4.17 per acre. So that's made out a lot better than Doug and Cook and Holmes did, and for that matter, Hitchings. Keck was unknown. And here's my note. Dwayne Smith notes in Sagebrush Metropolis that the Durango Trust eventually purchased 2,760 acres. Some prices paid for Durango town site lots. Lot 3, block 60, $250. That's one lot. That's a 25-foot lot. Bell sold lots 14, 15, 16, block 33 to William Chestnut for $500. So up here, they're paying $500 for 120 acres, and down here they're selling 3 25-foot lots for $500. And this is early on. Choice corner lots sold for $1,000 as early as November 1880. So you can see what we mean by land speculation and real estate development opportunities. It was unbelievably expensive, though, to build these railroads. And remember that when they were building the San Juan extension, they were building on other fronts at the same time. So Palmer was very aggressive about this. And honestly, once they got the so-called Royal Gorge War settled in court, investors, the investment money started coming in. So they had money to do this, and they obviously made a lot of money with these real estate sales, coal development, bringing the smelter in, all this stuff. But Palmer's aggressive approach, and you have to understand too that there were these bigger, he was a relatively small fish compared to Union Pacific, Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, Northern Pacific, some of these other bigger railroads that had people like Jay Gould, and they were very predatory. I mean, we're seeing some predatory things going on these days, with Paramount and all that stuff, but the same thing here. So Palmer was running scared a little bit and trying to be very aggressive. Well, the board forced him out, board of the railroad forced him out as president in 1883. So just a couple of illustrations. Here's some early plat maps of Durango. I think these are two very similar ones that just let you know also there's not just one plat out there. It wasn't just one plat for Animas City either. These plats kind of tended to change over time. But what this tells you is that Durango was very much a planned community. And they planned for blocks with parks. They set aside a block for the county government. They planned the retail district. See how to go. Retail district was along Main, the wholesale district on 2nd Avenue, or that or the other way around. And 3rd Avenue was planned as the premier residential boulevard with homes and churches and schools and a median with trees. And, Colorado Springs was kind of had set the example for that. So very much a planned community. There's an interesting inset in an 1893 map of Southwest Colorado. And again, you can see Animas City up here, Brookside right here. This is Dwyer's old ranch. And actually this part here was part of the Animas City town site. Came down almost to where Junction Creek comes into the Animas on the east side of the river. North Durango was part of the original Durango development, at least most of it. Some of it was, some of it wasn't. Schuyler Smith, I think, was the guy who, and Fastbinder had the homestead where St. Columba Church is and all that now. And then Durango down here. And of course, you see the smelter. There's actually 2 smelters. Standard smelter was built a little bit later to process the ores from the Red Mountain Mining District. And you're going to see something, those of you who take the newspaper, you're going to see something about this tramway line, maybe tomorrow. But the other thing I want to point out about this map were all the coal mines. It's coal everywhere around the town site. So that's a big reason why. The other thing too, and you can see it from this map, is where Durango was situated was where all the transportation routes came together. And a couple of early pictures of Durango. This cow path here in the lower left part of the photo is 3rd Avenue. I like this photo. This is early. They had built part of the smelter. This has got to be early 1881, and you look and you go, huh, wonder if this big wide thing was Main Avenue. It's not. It's where the railroad went. It's an alley now. Main is right here. And you could see south of about 8th Street, it didn't even go through. And the rail lines coming in here, they hadn't even started on the depot, which didn't open until 1882. They had all kinds of disagreements about that, but gives you an idea of what early Durango looked like. And there's my sources. So would somebody turn the light on back there, please? Okay, good. I bet there's a question or two. No? Okay. Okay.
Maybe I don't know why I think, I thought to have a homestead, you had to be on it, and there were certain regulations, you had to build a house, you had to do blah, 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 blah. And it sounds like so many of these people were not even there, much less building a house, but, you know.
Well-
Okay.
Right, that was one way to get your homestead. Oh, the question was, the woman asked if, you know, thought that you had to live on your homestead and prove up on it to get title to it. But you could also buy your homestead. You could just pay the government for the land and get title to it. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Follow up that, so were those just speculative purchases, like people living in Alabama were like, I'm gonna buy 80 acres in this little region of Colorado?
Far as I know, they hardly had to lift a finger because they gave Bell a power of attorney to do all this stuff. And all these documents, the powers of attorney, the warranty deeds, any of the legal documents that needed recording had to be recorded in Lake City. It's not exactly, it's not even easy today to get to Lake City from here. So, yeah, I mean, I think the only finger they had to lift, well, two fingers. One, they had to get a lawyer to do a POA, and two, they had to put the money in the bank. Other than that, I don't know that there was anything else that they did. Probably something. Money,
Just to buy it and then resell it.
profit.
Yeah.
I mean, they're doubling their money or better. You know, some of those people were being paid over $4 an acre, and it only cost you $1.25 an acre to buy it. I mean, there's a lot more we don't know about these people than we do know. There's lots of questions there. Susan and I were talking about this the other day. The more you know, the more you learn, the more questions you have. So, anything else? Yes.
Could you go back and talk about the Utes a little more, so that they just completely out of the picture after whatever you said happened in 1974 or something?
Yeah, question was talk about the Utes a little bit more. You know, traditionally this was all Ute territory. Southern Utes down here, basically because of the mountain barriers. Northern Utes were north of, you know, Red Mountain, north of the San Juans and west of the Continental Divide mostly, but they all hunted out into the plains, you know, for buffalo and whatnot. Gosh, it's a long story, but there were there were treaties with the Utes that dated even back to the 1840s. There was notably a treaty in 1860 that really nothing was much done about it. But in 1868, there was a treaty with the Utes. And hold that thought for a minute, remind me where I was, because I want to diverge for a second. When they were dealing with the Native American groups, originally they did it with treaties, like you would do with a foreign country. Treaties were ratified by a vote of the Senate only, 2/3, I think. They changed that process in dealing with the Native Americans to what they called an agreement, which only required a majority of both houses of Congress. So there's a little distinction here, but in 1868, it was a treaty, and the Utes agreed to a large reservation that constituted about the western third of Colorado. Didn't last very long because, you know, this is 1868, it's after the Civil War. Miners are starting to come in, especially to the San Juan area, mostly to Baker's Park, but other places too. And, you know, the government pretty much took the approach, they were trespassing. They decided rather than try to evict all the trespassers, it would be easier to go back and deal with the Utes and get them to agree to cede part of their reservation, which they did in 1874. They ceded a big rectangular area that went from north of Ouray to, on the north, to a short distance south of Durango. I can tell you because you'll know these landmarks, but do you know where Basin Creek comes down and where the Isgars live? That's about where the Ute line is, and that county road that's at the top of Farmington Hill that goes over to Falfa, that is on the Ute ceded line. So everything south of that was reservation. But between there and north of Ouray and almost to the Utah boundary and over east as far as about Pagosa Springs, that was the rectangular, that was the San Juan Cession. So that area became government land and people could move in and mine on it and homestead and create farms and ranches and build little towns like Animas City and Durango and things like that. So does that help? Yeah. Tina.
I'm just curious about the reservoir. So you showed pictures of the reservoir long time ago. Is it the same reservoir that's there now?
No. Durango has always had good water rights, initially in the Animas River, but the Animas got pretty polluted pretty quickly. So they acquired rights to Florida River water. And around the turn of the century, they built some high altitude reservoirs to, you know, entrap water up there. And then it flowed down into the Florida drainage. And at some point, there's a diversion, a pipeline that takes it all the way down to the terminal reservoir, which at that time was about where the softball fields are up at the college, kind of on the rim of the college. And then from there was gravity flow to town. Back in the 50s or 60s, they built the existing terminal reservoir up by where you guys live. And, you know, put the water treatment plant in and things like that. I'm glad you asked that question though, because one thing I kind of forgot to do was put a little epitaph on Animas City, which lasted until 1948, but they really, for almost all their history, they had financing problems. They did not have much of a tax base, certainly not like Durango. People who lived in Animas City were generally poor. They couldn't afford taxes and fees and, you know, paying for water like we do. And it got to the point where there was a diversion out of Junction Creek in a ditch that ran, you know, up here along this hillside. But it got to the point where they needed more water. And they also, Animas City also had water rights in the Florida. So Durango was, moving Florida River water to their terminal reservoir. So what they did was they negotiated with Durango to have their Florida water delivered to them from Durango's reservoir. But there was a cost to that. And it just got to the point where they couldn't pay it. So they were, by the end of World War II, they were on hard times and very reluctantly voted to annex to the city of Durango. Yeah. Anything else? Another question? Why?
And the people in Arkansas and Missouri, how long did they homestead that land before they signed the power of attorney over it? Did it all happen the same day?
As far as I know, the power of attorney came first, 1879. And all I know is when the homestead patents were issued, which was probably a bit of a time-consuming process, but those homestead patents were issued in 1881, so less than 2 years. From the time that they did the POA to the time that the homestead's patents were issued, and I think they'd already been paid for the land, so the sequence of events is kind of goofy in there. It's a little hard to.
The whole deal was worked out before they did anything?
Ads in the paper. I don't know. I do, yeah. I do not know and have not been able to determine what the connection, if any, was. Well, there had to be a connection between these dummy homesteaders, I'm going to call them, and the people who were developing the Durango town site. Does that answer your question? Okay. I think I'm forgetting to repeat the questions too, but
Is there any evidence that these sort of dummy homesteaders ever actually parted with any money, or just that they received money? In other words, sign the power of attorney, sometime in the near future you will receive.
the power of attorney documents include the purchase price. So I think, by that legal transaction, I don't know when they got paid. I haven't seen their bank records, but that I don't know. But that was specified in the first document that we have a record of. So it wasn't like, they did the POA, they got the homestead patent, they applied for it, they got it, they paid for it, sold the property to the railroad, got paid. The record would tell you that they got paid up front, but I don't know.
Sounds like.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, good. Well, thank you all for coming.